Hi, it's Jennifer McGuire. Thanks for stopping by. I love showing ways to stretch products that you might already have, and today I'm going to do just that with Pigment Ink. I'm going to actually show you how to add color to a stamped image on a dark cardstock with Pigment Ink. Don't worry if you don't have these same products. I'll mention some others along the way that would work also. So I'm working on a darker colored cardstock. This is a craft cardstock from Hero Arts, and it has kind of like the feel of a paper bag, but it's heavier weight, of course, but it's got that texture and the variety in it. I just think it's beautiful. And I love stamping these soft images with white and then adding some soft color to it. I think the contrast is really nice. I'm using some new stamps from Mama Elephant. I love that company, and I think these are beautiful. They're a great stamp set for kind of building up a large image. All these little pieces kind of fit together. There are also dies available. I'm not actually going to be using those today, but I am going to be using the stamp set. So I have a piece of masking paper from Inkadinkado, and I'm actually going to stamp several of these images from the stamp set onto the masking paper. I'm not sure yet which images I'm going to need for masking, but I might as well go ahead and get them all done at once. If I don't use them, or even if I do use them, I can save them in my stamp pocket with my stamp set and use them again and again in the future. If you don't have masking paper, you can use a Post-it paper, or you can use any kind of typing paper and just use temporary adhesive with it. But I love this masking paper. It just makes it really easy. So I'm stamping these all in a light ink. It really doesn't matter what ink you use, and I cut it out real close to the edge. I like a clear-cut mask like that, but I'm not super careful. It doesn't have to be just perfect. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to be stamping this on a darker color cardstock, a craft cardstock, but any dark color cardstock would work, or any color cardstock as a matter of fact. And I will first stamp with a bright white pigment ink and then add some color on top of it. This just allows the color to stay more true. Now normally when I do this, I start with my frontmost image first and stamp that, but I wanted to start with the picture first and then do the arrangement over it. But I knew I wanted that flower and leaf to hang lower than the top of the picture. So I'm going to go ahead and put the mask for the flower and the leaf down first. I could have stamped these first and put the mask on top, but I'm kind of figuring this out as I go, and you're seeing that process here. Now I'm stamping with a white pigment ink, the Unicorn White Pigment Ink from Hero Arts. This is my favorite white ink. And you'll notice I didn't do a good job inking up my stamp, but that's okay. This ink stays wet a little bit longer, so I can kind of rub it to smooth it out. Now I'm going to carefully remove my mask because I don't want to mess up this white ink. The white pigment inks, any kind of pigment ink, stays wet for a while, so you don't want to smudge it. And I love how bright that white is against the background. But I did want to add some color to this. I'm choosing to add color with other pigment inks, and I'm using the Mama Elephant pigment ink line. Now I'm using a tool to do this called a Fantastics. It's like a sponge-like pointy tip, and I just love how easy these are to kind of use like a pencil and apply this ink on top of the white ink. Now if you don't have these, you could use a Q-tip, but they don't have as nice of a fine tip as these do. These are a handy tool to have, and you can reuse them again and again, and they're very inexpensive. So I'm basically just coloring this ink over the white. If you don't have colors of pigment inks like this, you could use colored pencils here, or you can try some other dye inks, but I really like that the pigment ink stays on top of the paper so you can see that color on top of this dark background. So let's go ahead and keep going, and I'll show you some more. I'm stamping the flower here with the white pigment ink and then using another Fantastics to apply a pink ink on top of it. Now these Fantastics you can use over and over again, but once they're with one color, you kind of want to keep them to that one color because it's kind of hard to get it off the tip. So I have one for each color so I can reuse them over and over again. So now let's go ahead and do the leaf. You can see this all starts to come together pretty quickly. I'm going to stamp the leaf with the white ink and then use another Fantastics with the green ink to quickly apply ink. You can see how fast it is to apply this. Now again, colored pencils will be awesome on top of this white pigment ink, and I've showed that technique in the past before. So you can check out another video here. You can click in the corner to see that demonstrated. To keep this going, I'm going to skip a few of these flowers. I did stamp 3 tiny little white pigment ink flowers above that pink one, and then I added some color with my Fantastics, some yellow and orange ink on top to have those 3 little flowers. Okay, so now I have little masks for each of those. I know it seems so crazy to cut little masks this small, but really I think it's worth it in the end, and I'm going to reuse these on future projects too. So, and again, the masks don't have to be cut perfect. They just have to be kind of the same shape. So I've covered up those little yellow flowers. I'm going to cover up the pink one here. I'm going to stamp this little bunch of tiny little flowers behind it. I don't know what kind of flower this is, maybe a lilac or something. So I'm going to stamp this with the white ink to put like a base of white down. I didn't really do a good job there, so I'm going to stamp it again to kind of get some more color on the bottom or some more of that white ink on the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and remove my mask here. Now again, the reason I'm putting down the white ink first is so that there's like a white background to add my color on top of. You could just stamp all these images with the colored pigment ink on top of the craft and you would see the color, but you're going to see more color this way, and you also get that soft kind of painted look by adding the colored pigment ink on top of the white. Now to save time on this, I'm not going to really be super careful to get these completely covered here. I'm just using the tip of my Fantastics to put little dots of purple ink on top of the white. Sorry my hand gets in the way, it's kind of hard to color this without it getting in the way of the camera, but I'm doing this quickly. It doesn't have to be perfect, you just want to add some color on top of the white ink. So once I have all that purple on top of it, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next flower. Now to do this next flower, I need to mask off most of the other flowers, and I'm going to do this big bunch of flowers here, and I will also again add some purple pigment ink on top of this. And I will go back later and add some more color on top of these because I felt like it was too much purple, and I'll show you that step in a few minutes. Now you can see how quick and easy it would be just to use a colored pencil and just quickly put little dots of color to cover the white pigment ink too. So that's another option. You could also add chalk on top of this if you wanted to. Now since I had a lot of purple here, on this flower I'm going to add some soft blue ink to it. It kind of looked like a hydrangea, I think, even though that's not what this flower is. I just was kind of going for that color. I never try to be perfect with my colors on flowers. And on this side I'm going to add some pink ink. It's just to kind of differentiate those two flowers a little bit. Just adding little touches with the tip of that Fantastics. Okay, so now that I have these guys done, it's time to add some more leaves sticking out of this. Now remember, this is a wet pigment ink. Pigment inks sit on top of the paper and stay wet for a while, so you want to be careful not to smudge them. So you'll see I'm being careful as I work to not rub this with my finger. If you want to dry it quickly as you're going, you can heat set it with your heat gun, and that'll prevent you from smearing it. Now, if you notice also, I'm not being real perfect with my masking here and with my stamping. That's okay. I think that's part of the technique, and it doesn't have to be perfect. If you want a perfect image, use dye inks on white cardstock. For this, I don't think you need to have that. And I also am going and kind of filling in the areas that I didn't stamp well with my colored pigment ink that I put on top. So I'm adding some highlights here with the green ink on top of the white leaves. Now once I'm done with this, I have a very soft looking image, but there's not much distinction between each flower. So I'm actually going to go back and add kind of like a white edge to the images, like a highlighting. So I have a Fantastics and I'm actually touching it onto that white pigment ink pad and basically just putting thin lines of white around some of my images, not entirely around all of it, but just little highlights here and there just to give it some definition. And you can see it kind of makes a big difference in kind of making it all pop, since we have such a wash of soft color along all of these images. Now you could use a white pen here if you wanted to, and I actually tried that, but I felt like it was a little too harsh against the soft background, and just using the tip of a Fantastics with that white pigment ink just really gives the highlights that you need without being too harsh. So you can't see the white pigment ink outside of the screen there, but it's the same white pigment ink that I used before, the unicorn white pigment ink. Now I'm just putting little tiny dots of white pigment ink along my little flowers in the background here. And I'll put some kind of scattered around the stamped image too, just for some interest. Now if you don't have the unicorn white pigment ink, other white pigment inks work also, like the Colorbox Frost White, but by far the most vibrant white that I've ever found is that unicorn white pigment ink, and that's why I use it all the time. But you can use any white pigment ink you may have on hand. Now dye inks don't work as well on dark colored cardstocks because the ink absorbs into the paper and you lose a lot of the color. So pigment inks, since they sit on top, they really stay more true to color when you do it on a dark cardstock such as this craft. Okay, so now that I have this all done here, I'm going to heat set it so I don't mess it up as I finish. And then I went ahead and trimmed it down. I didn't really stamp centered on that piece of craft, so I trimmed it down a little bit. And I'm going to put a white heat embossed greeting across this. Now since I've put a lot of ink down, I need to use my anti-static tool first. That's what this is. It puts down a powder. before I do any embossing. Don't worry, you can rub that powder off when you're done. So I have a greeting from that same stamp set that I'm stamping with Versamark ink, and then I'll add some white embossing powder and heat set that. And this white greeting will be a lot more vibrant white, true white on top of this image, but that's okay because I think it needs to stand out against the background. Now once this is kind of cooled down, I can rub my fingers over it and remove all that powder. I went ahead and put this onto a white note card, and I'm taking a greeting out of that same stamp set for the inside. It says, I think it says sending lots of hugs, and I straightened it out. It's a stamp that's actually meant to be curved, but I straightened it out on my acrylic mount so that it would stamp straight in there with the pink pigment ink. So there you have a way you can take your colored pigment inks and put it on top of white ink to add a soft coloring. If you're interested in any of these products, they're linked below in my YouTube description. Also, you can go to my blog at jennifermcguireink.com where there will be a giveaway of stamps like this one. Thanks so much for spending time with me, and I hope to see you again soon.